I've watched guys grab that blue and yellow can and go straight for the brake rotor to stop a squeal, every time, like it's the obvious move. And I've never once stopped them before they finished, because the conversation after is the one that actually sticks. The most recent one was a 2019 Chevy Equinox. Owner had a rear brake squeal that had been going on for about 3 weeks. Intermittent, mostly cold mornings, the kind of noise that's annoying but not alarming. He'd already had the pads inspected at a shop, been told they had plenty of life left, sent home with no answer and a $45 inspection fee. So he did what millions of people do when a shop gives them nothing. He grabbed the WD-40 from the shelf and went to work. Sprayed the rotor, sprayed the caliper, figured he was done. The squeal stopped the next morning. It came back 4 days later, worse. And when I looked at that rear rotor, the friction surface had a film on it, not rust, not dust, a petroleum residue that had baked partially onto the iron. The pad contact was uneven. The braking force on that corner was compromised in a way you'd never feel until you needed everything the car had. That's the conversation I had with him. And that's the one I want to have with you right now. Because the problem isn't WD-40. The problem is that almost nobody knows what it actually is, and the can doesn't go out of its way to tell you. WD-40 stands for water displacement, 40th formula. The company's engineers tried 39 versions before this one worked. It was originally developed in 1953 to prevent corrosion on Atlas missile parts. It displaces moisture, dissolves light oxidation, leaves a temporary protective film, and acts as a mild solvent. That's it. It is not a lubricant. It never was. The film it leaves evaporates in hours to days depending on temperature and exposure. What stays behind after that film is gone is sometimes nothing, and sometimes a residue that attracts dust and grit like a magnet. Once you understand what it actually is, the 9 uses that professionals reach for it make complete sense, and the 4 places where it should never go become just as obvious. Let me start with the uses, because most of them aren't what you'd expect. The first one is electrical connectors. If you've ever had a car that cranks but won't fire after sitting out in the rain, or a sensor code that disappears after a dry day and comes back the next time it's wet, moisture in an electrical connector is usually the first suspect. A short burst of WD-40 into the connector, reconnect, and let it sit for 5 minutes. It was literally invented for this. The Atlas missile team needed moisture out of metal components. That's what it does. Works on ignition coil connectors, oxygen sensor plugs, mass airflow sensor wiring, any connector that's exposed and seeing water intrusion. The second use is road tar and adhesive removal from painted surfaces. Parking lot tar, tree sap, sticker adhesive left on paint after removing a decal, WD-40 cuts through all of it without damaging the clear coat, as long as you wipe it off within a few minutes and follow with a soap wash. A shop rag with a small amount applied directly is less messy and more controlled than spraying. Most guys don't know it does this, and they're paying for tar remover products that do exactly the same thing with a different label. Third, seized spark plugs. Before you put a ratchet on a spark plug that hasn't moved in 60,000 miles, soak the base with WD-40 and give it 15 minutes. In aluminum heads, which is most modern engines, a steel spark plug that's been heat cycled for years can seize into the thread. Breaking one off in the head turns a 20-minute job into a 3-hour extraction or worse. The penetrating action of WD-40 on a soaked thread is real. Use it. Fourth use, and this one I want to come back to, because there's a specific way to do it wrong that causes its own problem, is battery terminals. A thin coat after installation slows oxidation significantly, but I said I'd come back to it, and I will, because thin coat is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and most guys don't do thin. I'm going to get to the rest of the list, 5 more uses, and then the 4 places that are absolute hard stops. And one of those 4 is going to be a place you might not expect. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and how long that can of WD-40 has been sitting in your garage. I want to know. If this channel gives you something useful every time you tune in, subscribe. No filler, no product pitches, just the information you actually need. Back to battery terminals, because I said thin coat, and I meant it. The reason WD-40 works on terminals is the same reason it's a problem when you apply too much. It's a petroleum-based product that attracts particulate. A light mist on a clean terminal, wipe to a thin film before reconnecting the cable. That slows oxidation and keeps the connection clean. A heavy spray that pools in the cable boot boot and the plastic housing around the post. That residue collects conductive dust over time, and you end up with resistance at the terminal instead of protection. I've seen guys treat their battery terminals every 6 months for years and wonder why they have more corrosion problems than before. Amount matters. Fifth use, and this one has saved me more time on rusted chassis work than almost anything else, is exhaust manifold bolts. If you're working on a car that's seen a few winters, those manifold studs are threaded into cast iron that's been heat cycled hundreds of times with road salt in the mix. Before you put any kind of socket on them, soak the exposed threads with WD-40 and give it at least 10 minutes. For really stubborn ones, a second application and overnight is better. The alternative, trying to remove a seized stud without penetrant, is how you snap it flush with the head. Extracting a broken exhaust stud is a job that turns a simple gasket replacement into a 2-day ordeal. 10 minutes of patience with it can cost nothing. Sixth, throttle cables and door lock cylinders on older vehicles. If a cable feels stiff or a lock is sluggish in cold weather, WD-40 loosens them immediately. On cables, the caveat is the same as with the battery. Don't overdo it. For long-term lubrication of cables you'll come back to, follow WD-40 with a proper cable lube or white lithium grease. WD-40 opens the door. The heavier product holds it. Seventh use that most guys have never tried. Door weather stripping squeaks in cold weather. Rubber seals contract in the cold and start binding and squealing when you open the door. A thin wipe of WD-40 on the seal surface with a rag eliminates it immediately without damaging the rubber. Better than silicone spray for this specific application because it penetrates slightly into the surface without leaving a wet residue that attracts dirt. It lasts about 2 to 3 weeks and then you repeat. Eighth, surface scratches in clear coat. WD-40 fills the microscopic valleys of a light scratch, allowing light to reflect evenly across the surface and making the scratch essentially invisible. It doesn't fix anything. It's temporary. It'll need to be reapplied, and it washes off. But if you're showing a car and there's a light surface scratch from a shopping cart, a thin application on a cloth wiped across the scratch buys you a clean presentation. Mechanics use this. Detailers use this. It works. Ninth, tools. Before you put metal tools away in a damp garage, a light spray on the working surfaces and wipe down before storage prevents surface rust without leaving a heavy oil coating. The film stays long enough to get through a few weeks between uses. For tools you're putting away for months, you want something heavier, but for the socket set that comes out every weekend, WD-40 works fine. That's 9. Now the 4 places, and I want you to pay attention to the sequence here, because I'm going to go in order of severity. Brake rotors and pads. You already know about this from the Equinox at the start. I'll say it once more and move on. A petroleum film on a friction surface destroys stopping power. The contamination bakes into the pad material. You can't clean a contaminated brake pad. It gets replaced. That's before we talk about the liability of compromised brakes in an emergency stop. Don't do it. Drive belts, serpentine belt, accessory belt, any rubber belt running off the crankshaft. WD-40 causes rubber to swell initially, then crack and harden over time. More immediately, the solvent makes the belt slip on the pulley. A slipping belt means the alternator, power steering pump, or AC compressor aren't being driven at full capacity. On an interference engine, which most modern engines are, a timing belt that slips or snaps means the valves meet the pistons. That's an engine replacement, not a repair. I have seen this happen from one application of WD-40 on a belt that was already borderline. The guy thought he was stopping a squeal. He was. Wheel bearings and CV joints. WD-40 dissolves grease. The packed grease inside a wheel bearing or CV joint is specifically formulated to withstand high load and heat. It's not interchangeable with anything thin. When WD-40 gets into a bearing, it doesn't lubricate it. It strips the grease that was doing the job and it evaporates, leaving metal on metal. The bearing might feel better for a day or two. Then it runs dry. And a wheel bearing that runs dry doesn't give you much warning before it lets go. The 4th place, the one I said you might not expect, is anything near a hot exhaust component. WD-40 has a flash point of around 47 degrees Celsius. Your exhaust manifold at operating temperature is running at 400 degrees Celsius in a gasoline engine, higher in diesel. If you spray WD-40 anywhere in the vicinity of a hot exhaust, and it contacts the surface, or the vapor contacts it, you have a fire. This has been documented in insurance claims. It's not a hypothetical. Let the engine fully cool before you use WD-40 anywhere in the engine bay near exhaust routing. I said there was something about WD-40 used wrong that creates a problem worse than using nothing at all. That's in the next section. And if you've been using this product in your garage for years, it's going to change how you think about every application going forward. Here's the thing about WD-40 that nobody prints on the can. The petroleum film it leaves behind, even on surfaces where you used it correctly, doesn't stay clean. It attracts particulate, brake dust, road grit, carbon from the engine bay, metal shavings from any grinding or machining nearby. Those particles bind into the film, and what you end up with, if you apply WD-40 repeatedly to the same surface without cleaning it first, is a gritty, abrasive paste sitting exactly where you were trying to provide protection. A door hinge that gets sprayed every few months without being clean collects more wear debris over 5 years than a door hinge that was never touched. I'm not exaggerating. The film acts as a trap. The paste that forms is harder on the metal than the dry friction it replaced. This is why the correct procedure, the one professionals follow, has 3 steps, not 1. Apply, work it in, wipe off the excess. Every time. The product does its job in the first few seconds of contact. What stays behind after that is the liability, not the benefit. Most guys do 1 step, they spray and walk away. And then they spray again in 3 months over the top of whatever built up from the last application. After a few years of that, you've got a surface that's worse off than if you'd left it alone and dealt with the problem a different way. The 2016 Ford Focus, 88,000 miles, rear wheel bearing. Owner had noticed a faint hum from the rear of the car around 60,000 miles. Thought it was road noise. Checked the tire, looked fine. A buddy told him the bearing was probably just a little dry, spray some WD-40 into the dust shield area and it'll quiet down. He did it. It did quiet down for about a week, so he did it again and again. By 88,000 miles, the bearing let go. Not a gradual failure with weeks of warning. It let go. The wheel had perceptible play in it by the time he brought it in, and the inner race showed scoring that looked like it had been running without lubrication for thousands of miles. Because it had been, the WD-40 had displaced the factory-packed grease, already partially depleted by normal wear, and evaporated. What it left behind was that particulate paste, running against the bearing races at highway speed. The bearing didn't fail because it was dry. It failed because it was running on something actively abrasive. $320 for the bearing, $180 in labor. And the original hum at 60,000 miles was probably the tire, which was showing uneven wear when I checked it, not the bearing at all. Now, one more thing before I close this out, because I've talked a lot about what the blue and yellow can isn't, and I want to be fair to the company. WD-40 makes a specialist line: white lithium grease, silicone spray, dry lube, penetrant. These are separate formulations designed for the jobs that the original formula can't do. When a mechanic tells you WD-40 is fine for that, sometimes they mean the specialist product, not the original. If you're looking for long-term lubrication on a cable, a hinge that sees heavy use, or a suspension component, that's the specialist white lithium, not the blue can. Different chemistry entirely. Read the label on whatever you're reaching for, because the brand name covers a product range that includes things that actually are lubricants. The original formula has been around since 1953. It works exactly as designed, just not for everything people use it for. 1 thing it's genuinely good for. 9 things it handles well in the right hands. 4 places it doesn't belong. And 1 rule that covers all of it. Apply, work it in, wipe the excess. Always. The Equinox owner asked me what he should have used on that brake squeal to begin with. Brake cleaner spray on the rotor surface removes dust and contamination without leaving any residue. Costs $4. If the squeal came back after that, it was a pad issue, not a contamination issue, and it needed a real diagnosis. Not a $4 can and not a blue and yellow one. That's the channel. Practical, specific, no product pushed, no guesswork. Subscribe if you want more of it. We're here every week.